We're going to have a question and answer right after our next presentation by Cara Stillings Candal. Cara is familiar, I think, to many of you. She's an education researcher and writer, a former high school English teacher and test and curriculum development specialist at Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. She was a founding member of the National Academy of Advanced Teacher Education. She is an adjunct faculty member at the Education Leadership and Policy Studies unit at Boston University's School of Education and a senior fellow at Pioneer Institute. She holds a bachelor's in English literature from Indiana University, a master's from the University of Chicago, and a doctorate in educational leadership and policy from Boston University. She's also a Board of Trustee member at City on a Hill in Boston. Thanks very much for being here. We look forward to hearing your comments.
I'm told this is going to work seamlessly. Whoops. Oh, that's my child again. Sorry. There it is. Pick that up. Oh. Okay. Wonderful to be here today. Thank you so much to Deborah McGriff. You mentioned innovation several times in your talk, and it's a word that I know we love to hear at Pioneer Forums. It's a word we'd like to hear more of, I think, in Massachusetts policy work, especially around our charter schools. And thank you for mentioning Boston Collegiate, a place where I, too, have got to spend time, and the organization that I helped to found about 5 years ago, National Academy of Advanced Teacher Education. We have had several teachers from Boston Collegiate that have just knocked our socks off. So it's wonderful to hear about these schools that we all love. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about policy and get Massachusetts-centric again. As a frame, for the past 6 months or so, we've been publishing a series of papers looking at best practices in the charter sector. We've got about 6 done at Pioneer, 2 more to go. And we've also been looking just very generally at the changing demographics of charter schools, not just in Boston, I think it's important to say, but beyond Boston as well. So I'm going to first take some time to think about demographics with you, and then go on to talk about some of what we found in terms of best practices going on in Massachusetts charter schools. Before I do that, I think it's always great, Jim gave us a little reminder at the beginning, to have a reminder of why charter schools exist in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. If we look at the law, there are really 4 main reasons: opportunity for students, innovation, achievement, and new accountability models. And as we think about what charter schools in the Commonwealth are doing currently, I encourage us to keep these things in mind and think not only about what we are doing well, but what we could do better, and what policies we need to put in place to ensure that these things continue to happen. I won't go through all of these, but these are the guiding questions that we had in mind when we set out to look at what some of the very high-performing schools in the Commonwealth are doing. First, we just wanted to look at special populations. Massachusetts charter schools, as we all know, and as they should be, have been held to account for making sure that we enroll populations of students with special needs, such as English language learners, students with special educational needs, at parity with our district counterparts. And I think it's really important to track this. Jim said at the outset that some great work has been done at MIT that's tracking this. I'm going to give you the general information today that says where we are. Beyond that, I think it's really important to look at schools that happen to be serving these populations of students really well. So I'm going to highlight some of what we've found for you. So here's a graph showing English language learner enrollment since 2010. So why 2010 is important, as many of you remember, because that was the last time we lifted the charter cap, and 2010, embedded in that legislation was a law that said districts have got to share student information with charter school counterparts. So this is important because charter schools were under the gun to enroll higher percentages of students that are categorized under special populations. And 2010, many believe, gave charters the ability to more effectively recruit all students, including English language learners and special education students. So what we see on this graph is a steady increase since that time in the number of English language learners that are enrolled in charter schools. This is Boston versus BPS, as you can see. Really interesting to note that from 2010 to 2011, we see a very large uptick in the number of ELL students enrolled in BPS especially. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know if that's due to how students are categorized or if that's a true reflection of what was going on in BPS. But also really important here is the steady upward climb of enrollment in Boston charter schools of English language learners. It's something that we hope will continue. I think it's also really important to point out, we have to remember we're not going to see a dramatic explosion of enrollment because of the way in which charter schools take students in, right? We're not constantly taking students in at every grade, but we're taking them in at certain points. So I would put to you that this represents an important trend and one that we need to see continue. I'd also like to highlight a couple of schools that are enrolling students, these are not just Boston schools, but that are enrolling ELL students at higher rates than the sending district. Because I'm a little bit obsessed with it right now, one of my favorite parts of working for Pioneer is that I get to spend a lot of time doing observations in schools. I'd like to highlight the Lowell Community Charter School in Lowell, Mass. You'll see that they have almost 47% of their students are English language learners. There are over 40 different languages spoken in this elementary school, and I have to tell you, it's one of the most joyful places I've ever been. I was so fascinated to sit in and see the great work that these folks are doing. This is also important to note, and to the point about accountability in Massachusetts, this school about 4 or 5 years ago was in dire straits, not performing well. It has been dramatically turned around because the state held it accountable for doing so, and now they're serving all of their students, including 47% population of English language learners, very, very well. So a school to watch, as are the others here and many others. So as Jim pointed out, we now have evidence that as the number of English language learners enrolled in charter schools in Massachusetts increases, charters are continuing to serve those students very well. So this graph shows us the state, Boston Public Schools, and Boston charters, and the percent of students proficient or advanced on the 2014 MCAS. And you'll see that ELL students in Boston charters are faring particularly well in terms of their ability to pass MCAS, and hopefully in the future we'll see pass the additional tests that we'll be giving, MCAS 2.0. We see similar trends with special education students. Again, this is just Boston Public and Boston charters, but we'll see that since 2010, there's been a slight uptick in special education enrollment in Boston charter schools. I think what's really important to note is that Boston charters are much closer to parity with the district when it comes to enrolling special education students. And again, many point to the 2010 law and the ability to more effectively recruit students. And also, I would say, the pressure that was placed on all of us after 2010 to ensure that we were recruiting and retaining all students. Again, I thought that it would be really important to highlight that some charter schools are really specifically focusing on serving special populations. And some of them might have, I'll talk about City on a Hill, New Bedford in a moment. One of the founders of the City on a Hill Public Schools is amongst us, and as Jim said, I'm on the board. But you'll see here, so we've got Phoenix Academy, which has 3 schools across the Commonwealth, but their Chelsea campus in particular has a much higher special education enrollment. In terms of best practices, I'll talk in a few moments about why that might be, but just to give you a hint, Phoenix would probably tell you that they have a pretty good relationship with the District of Chelsea, and that leadership in Chelsea wants to see students succeed. So when they think that that students can be better served at a place like Phoenix, they will make that recommendation to students. Academy of the Pacific Rim, again, a very high-performing charter school here in Boston, with a great increase in its special education enrollment in the past few years. And then I'd like to point out City on a Hill, New Bedford. So this is a school campus that is now 3 years old. And when City on a Hill expanded into New Bedford, I think it would be an honest thing to say that we were very surprised at the number of special education students that enrolled in our campus. We expected parity. We did not expect to have 33% of special education students. It's a challenge in many ways, because we need to train our teachers, we need to make sure that we can secure the resources we need to effectively serve all of these students. But it's one to which we're rising, and it's one that we are incredibly happy to have. But I point this out, I highlight this specifically to say that we were a little bit befuddled when we saw the percentage of enrollment. And what we're hearing from the community is that this is a small town. And it's not that we don't like all of our options, it's that we don't have a lot of options. And this was seen as a very promising alternative for many students in New Bedford, especially students who need special education services. And again, much like the numbers for English language learners, we can see that charter schools are serving special education students very well. So again, the state, Boston Public Schools, and Boston Charters on the 2014 MCAS, we can see that special education students are faring slightly better in Boston Charter Schools especially. Oh, and I've lost my slides. Okay. So I'm going to just pick it up from there then, and if anybody knows how to help me, that would be. So I think there are two really important things to highlight here. Number one is the why. So why and how are Boston charters and charters in Massachusetts more generally increasing the number of students with English language learner needs and special education needs in our midst? And there are a couple of reasons. The first, as I said, I heard time and again when conducting case studies, was that it was much easier after 2010. We had student information, we could more effectively recruit students. It was a boots on the ground approach. We could go into communities and tell people this is who we are, and we are here for all students, not just the students you might think we're here for. The second thing is that after 2010, I think especially, many charters just said we're going to rise to the occasion. So we are going to create schools, match, for example, partnering with Community Day. We are going to create schools especially for English language learners. Phoenix saying we are going to create schools for students who are at risk. And so these schools really stepping up and saying these are the populations of students we want to recruit and retain. Beyond that, I think it's really important to talk about why it is that these schools, there we go, can breathe a little bit. Oh, okay, I'm just going to keep going. Why these schools are serving students particularly well. So we conducted, as I said, a number of case studies, and in those case studies, we found a lot of the things that Deborah was highlighting in her work. First and foremost, one of the things I found was that the schools that were best serving students were very flexible and very nimble in their approach, right? So schools with very high percentages of English language learners, for example, were saying, we're going to not copy and paste a curriculum or adopt what somebody wants to sell us. Oh my goodness gracious. Adopt what somebody wants to sell us, but we're going to make it happen ourselves. We're going to individualize what we provide students with, and especially with regard to English language learners and special education students, we're going to provide inclusion when necessary, but try and keep students mainstreamed as much as possible. The other key thing that these organizations do is it's to the human capital piece. It's to the teacher pipeline piece. They are very, very specific, thank you, in the folks that they recruit to work for them, and they are very, very specific in how they train them. Every organization that I talked to a T said this is such an important autonomy that we have, to be able to hire the right people. And in fact, we are home-growing our teacher training programs to ensure that our teachers can meet the needs of the students that we have in front of us now. One of the other things that we saw was to the point that Deborah made around how innovative schools really engage students. We saw really innovative assessment practices. I saw in one of the schools that I went to assessments that might have looked a little bit, students were taking formative assessments on computers all the time, where to the casual observer, this might look like, oh my goodness, these students are spending a lot of time with technology and on computers. When I spoke to students, what I realized they were doing was taking formative assessments, and the onus was really on them to own the learning, to understand where they stood with their own learning in order to start from one point and get to a goal. So they knew where they stood, where they had to be, and where they were going next. These were kids that were really, truly engaged in their own learning. Oh, we're close. Thank you very much. The final thing that we saw, thank you very, very much. In so many of these case studies was non-traditional approaches to discipline. So many of us have seen in the Globe in recent weeks a lot of articles saying that charter schools are suspending students at higher rates. I think it's very important that we as a community are reflective about this. In some of the really excellent schools that we saw, one of the things that folks talked to me about was not just academic success for students, but the kind of people they're going to be graduating. It was about character development. And in many of these schools, they were rethinking the habits with which they equipped students to be successful. They were rethinking how they helped students understand their own habits and saying, we need to be more reflective about discipline. We need to individualize our approach to our students, not just in terms of academics, but in terms of how we help students grow as people. So this is a session about best practices in the charter sector, and I've highlighted a few of the things that schools are doing in order to help special populations of students to achieve. I think it's also really important when we think about best practices to think about where we can continue to do better. Not only for charter schools, but so that we can forge better relationships with our traditional public school counterparts in order to say, here's what we know, let's help you build, and by the way, there might be some things you can help us with too, right? One thing that I heard time and again in most of our case studies was school leaders and school administrators were really dismayed by the sort of climate within their communities and the sense that there wasn't a whole lot of reaching out across schools and across boundaries, especially across sector, right? Despite some of the great efforts that are underway in places like Boston to facilitate collaboration. I think it's really something important to think about. But specifically where charters need to do better, all charters, is that we clearly need a continued emphasis on the recruitment of special populations until we achieve or exceed parity. We're not there yet. We've made progress, and I think that policy clearly matters in this realm. At the same time, we need to be sure that we're keeping students. A lot of charters are, and a lot of charters are working on this very hard, but keeping students while we continue to increase achievement for our students. So not losing focus. Understanding the relationship between discipline structures and systems as they relate to student attrition. I know that's something we're working on very hard at City on a Hill, and as we've done that, we've seen that we're keeping more students and they're still achieving at very high levels. And as I said, capturing and sharing best practices and actively seeking cross-sector support where it is needed. I want to give you a couple examples of where I think cross-sector support is evident. So clearly the state has turned to some charter schools and said, you could be a great tool for turnaround. And I think Lawrence is a really cool place to look to see where things are working. So not only has student achievement gone up pretty dramatically in Lawrence in the past couple of years, in one of the papers we did was attributed by folks in Lawrence in part to some of the models they'd adopted from Match Education, one-on-one tutoring, really relentless support for students. But they've also partnered with folks like the Community Group to better help English language learners and the Phoenix Charter Network. I'll use another example from City on a Hill. When we, 5 years ago, started to look really, really seriously at our data on how many students were leaving us earlier than graduation, one of the things we did was we reached out to a public school in Boston. We reached out to the Jeremiah Burke and said, you guys have a really interesting early warning indicator system in place to tell you when students are at risk of leaving. Please share with us, and what can we do for you? And it's actually been a really enlightening and wonderful relationship thus far. And again, I'll point to Phoenix. I mentioned it earlier, but the Phoenix Charter School Network and the Chelsea Public Schools, I was actually having a conversation with Superintendent Mary Burke, who told me that actually, yes, we see this as a real asset within our community. So these are relationships that can work. The charter traditional public school dialogue doesn't always have to be so heated and so pitched. But what we do have to keep in mind is the policy piece. So accountability in Massachusetts, as we've said, it's really important, right? The case of Lowell Community Charter School, they were held accountable and they turned around in a matter of 3 years and have been helping students continue to achieve. Accountability in Massachusetts is working. But what we can't sacrifice is the autonomy that has allowed charter schools to innovate in ways that serve students. And I think that's one of the biggest risks we face right now in the Commonwealth. Really important to know that the schools that are enabling special populations of students and all students to achieve at the highest levels are leveraging their autonomies to do it. They value the priority they have over setting their own budgets. They value the priority they have over recruiting teachers, over developing teachers. They value those autonomies because they can make decisions that impact students in positive ways. And if we get to a place where autonomies are being curtailed or innovation is being curtailed, I fear that we're not going to see charters or any schools serving students in the way that they currently do. And this is something, a policy piece, I think, for the state. So while we should continue to leverage charter schools in many different ways, we should continue to leverage them for turnaround, we should continue to leverage them for partnership. When they're doing well, we should continue to share best practices and seek them, I would add. But if we get to a place where we're currently debating a cap lift, and if you read very closely some of the proposals for lifting the cap, I think that what I would like to caution us all against is proposals that are too stringent in terms of fostering this direct replication of schools as they expand around the Commonwealth, instead of allowing new schools to exist or allowing schools that currently exist to expand in different and innovative ways. I'll tell you again from New Bedford, one thing we learned: New Bedford is not Boston. Shocking. It's a different community, it's a different group of people, different desires, different needs. Everybody wants the best for their students, but we can't make assumptions that straight up replication of schools will work. And as Deborah pointed out, innovative schools are the future. This is the promise for our students. We have to ensure that any new charter legislation does not hamper innovation to the extent that our schools can no longer be successful. So here are a few recommendations. I think that I've been through most of them. I'd like to point to the third one, really importantly. As I mentioned, I think that we currently have in place a lot of local efforts aimed at getting schools to share best practices, but it could be that we need to do something to formalize this at the state level. It could be that we need to at least have a structure or a framework for helping schools recognize, hey, this school over here is supporting English language learners really well. You should reach out so that you can do better. If we had some structure among traditional public schools and charter schools and, oh my goodness, maybe even private schools as well, to talk about the ways in which we best serve students, I think we would be in a much better place. I wanted to leave today because, as I mentioned, I've been spending so much time in schools, and it's been such a joy to do so, with just the words of some of the students that I've met in some of the really cool charter schools that I've gotten to spend time in. And I see Joe McCleary's here, so the first is a quote from his school, where a student in Advanced Math and Science Academy told me that what she loved best was that everybody at her school is a nerd, that it was a great place to be a nerd. Students that are learning English, that are working really hard to excel through learning in English, but still going to school in a joyful environment where they can speak their own language and in fact learn about the cultures of students from all over the world. Third, this is from Phoenix Academy, where I was yesterday. I love that. And one of the students specifically told me, do not tell my teachers this, because I kind of want them to think that I'm angry all the time. But I really appreciate them. I really love them. They keep me in school, and I wouldn't be here otherwise. And finally, from a school in Worcester that has a wonderful character education curriculum, really thinking about new and innovative ways to think about the relationship between student attrition and discipline, told me that my school teaches me to do math, and it also teaches me to be a good friend. And I thought from that kindergartner, that was pretty awesome. So thank you very much for your time today.
So Cara has proven that Pioneer, one of the best practices, has to get its IT game up. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Identify yourself, ask a question. Mike, stay with the microphone.
I'm Gary Kaplan with JFI Networks. How important is online instruction as a tool for teachers, and do schools have enough technology?
There are schools that have no technology, and they are extremely successful. And I serve on the board of Rocket Ship, and many of you know Rocket Ship started with a blended learning K through 5, and it's one of the most successful schools in California, and it's expanding to DC and Milwaukee. So once again, it's about what's the model that you want to deliver for the kids in your community, and what's the academic achievement, and how does it compare to the academic achievement and rate of growth for other kids? We are not advocates for a single model. Even in the word innovation, we're looking at how people are being innovative in lots of different ways. And on the issue of how you share best practices, when we invest in folks, they join a community of practice. And we bring them together, and they are sharing and learning with each other. They're not trying to be each other, but they're trying to not to learn and not have to. Somebody's really good at the online piece, somebody else is really good on the talent piece, somebody else has special ed, and they're sharing across those. But I would not be anti-online, I would not be anti-blended learning, I would not be anti-technology. We need all of it because different kids need different things, and different educators want to teach in different ways.
I would just add to that one of the coolest things I saw in conducting case studies was at the Sabbath School in Holyoke. And I mentioned that this was the school in which students were very engaged in their own formative learning, so they were taking online formative assessments. One of the neatest things is that they have a system by which parents can also log in and know in almost real time exactly how their students are doing on these assessments, which facilitates conversations at home, which engages parents in a way. So I think, to echo what Deborah said, what I saw there was when it's done well, it can work really well. It doesn't necessarily have to be there. It has to be done well.
So I was very interested, Cara, in your description of the changes in the ELL and the special education population. When I looked at it, this was a number of years ago, the percentage of students eligible for free and reduced price lunch was lower in the charter school sector than the Boston public schools. I'm wondering if you know whether that has changed or whether it's where that stands.
I'd have to bring up my notes, and there might be others in this room that know better. I actually think that, well, the state has, first of all, of course, reclassified how we're looking at this, but charter schools in Boston still have, I think, higher levels of economically disadvantaged students than the traditional publics.
That's false.
That's false? Does somebody have the data?
It's on DESI's website.
Okay, I can try and bring it up. Okay, so I don't know that.
I will tell you that for the portfolio in new schools, and we have over 140 schools, the percentage, over 85% of our kids are low-income kids. And so when we speak about success and our kids go to college, they graduate from high school at twice the rate of low-income students across the nation. They graduate from college at 4 times the rates of other kids. And even though our current portfolio is predominantly Black and Latino kids at 95%, we're also, and Richard will love this, we have within our portfolio schools that are diverse by design. I'm on the board of the Denver School of Science and Technology, which opened under that, and we monitor the gap between low-income kids and affluent kids, and we monitor the gap between Black and Latino kids and others, and there are no gaps at DSST.
Can I just clarify, I'm looking at the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education fact sheet, 1516. Charters economically disadvantaged, 35.5%. State, 27.4%.
I knew Jeannie would correct us. Thanks, Jeannie.
Thank you. I was at a recent event with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers and all of the unions in the state, which are entering into a really innovative program. It used to be that General Electric, Gillette, North American Philips, USM, they all would have apprentice training programs. When you can acquire the skills, you can pay the bills. And I'm wondering, in the charter school's future, will it be somewhat the way the trends are going with the unions? The IBEW, the carpenters, the elevator repair programs were all offering a school that were right beside their unions, a school in which training took place in the skills and academic areas, and they had partnered with all of the community colleges and Wentworth Institute, for example, as a bachelor degree program. And they were teaching academics right along with a skill training program. Are there charter schools that are beginning to approach both the training of academic and technical skills?
I'll look to Jeannie for the national information, but my answer is probably yes. Because you can have a charter. Your charter authority is the only thing that limits who can have a charter. We don't happen to have any in our portfolio, but that's only because an entrepreneur hasn't come to us with that idea.
Quick answer to this. There was a charter, Hi, Ann Conley Tolkoff, founder of City on a Hill Charter School. In 93-94, Youth Build put in a proposal, and there was a high school in Boston that did work, and the unions did work with Youth Build. One of the big problems was, starting at the high school level, the youngsters didn't have the math preparations, and so the school ended up not meeting standards, and Youth Build lost its charter. But the idea was out there in the 90s, right in the middle of the big dig, when graduates and union people were making big money. It was a fabulous idea, but it was really the math skills that needed to start in elementary school that held it back.
My name's Rick Tortillas. I was the founder of Sturgis Charter School in Hyannis, which is how I know Andre very well as neighbors years ago. I'm concerned about all this mention of innovation, because I don't think innovation happens in the state, in the charter school world anymore. There's even the requirement in the lowest 10% performing communities that they all demonstrate they're proven providers, which is a very murky system as administered by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. The school I founded, which has done a lot since I left it years ago, is ranked the #1 public school in Massachusetts by 4 different national newspapers. And yet, the idea is there. Even though they're being expanded to include more and more urban students, most recently under a $20 million grant from the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, they cannot be applied in New Bedford, where I currently live and where I have been attempting to start a charter school. We're semifinalists in the XQ competition, but we are unlikely to be approved for a charter. I live within a block of City on a Hill, and I can attest to the truth of what you said, that in starting City on a Hill, no attention was paid whatsoever to what New Bedford needed. And the school in many respects is Dickensian, overlooking what New Bedford has to offer. Until Massachusetts decides it's going to move beyond a risk-averse strategy to chartering new schools, I think we're headed down the same path of no excuses schools trying to change their spots. That's not innovation. And I'm curious what the two of you think in terms of this, this discriminatory practice of insisting that students in our neediest communities cannot benefit from ideas or innovations directed specifically to them.
I'll go first on that. And I'll do a little historical perspective again. When New School was founded in 1998, we were simply trying to test the idea of entrepreneurs entering education and bringing innovation to the space. And once we had created these single site charters that were high performing, funders came to us and said, grow those single sites into systems, and now we have systems. So we have decided, and the research is clear, that simply replication was important for a portion of the history, but replication into the future is not going to get us the schools that we need, and that's why we've shifted to innovative school models. We're not only looking at new schools and new people to open them, but we're also saying to people like City on the Hill, if you have an innovative idea and all future schools are going to open under a new model, we will also support your new model, but in this round of our funding, we're not going to support replication. We at New Schools think that we built the CMO market, we can build the innovation market. And it took us, we've been working on this, the previous market since 1998. It won't happen tomorrow, but we've already invested in maybe 10 in our first round. We're about to announce our second round, and every year we will be announcing 2 rounds of charter schools, some that will be planning, some will be launching their first school, and some will be existing systems that are adopting new innovative models. We think it can be done.
Carol, we have time for one more very brief question, but I just want to say thank you for that question. It's the next.
It will be very brief, because it's a request. I'm Issa Zimmerman. I was superintendent in Acton, Boxborough in the 1990s when the Francis Parker Charter School started. And the relationship was wonderful. They did us a great favor, which leads me to my quick question. Is there a data bank of all of the practices that have proven to be successful in the charter schools that either have been adopted or have not been adopted? I'd love to see that kind of information. I think it would be very good for the charter school movement.
I'll share that request with Nina Reese at the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools, and I'm sure that the Center for Ed Reform is also taking notes, and there might be a report next year.
A couple of quick comments. One is part of what Cara's been doing for us is actually trying to flesh that out here in Massachusetts. And I think, again, all environments are somewhat unique, and I don't think what works here in Massachusetts is going to work elsewhere. One other comment, just on the voc tech side of things. We do have 63 vocational technical schools in Massachusetts. One of the difficulties of actually developing a charter school that's based on a vocational model or career tech model is that the cost differential that's built into that is pretty high. It's probably about $5,000, and we are very attuned at Pioneer at how to address the fact that we have 5,000 kids plus on vocational technical wait lists as well. So it's a great question, but it's a hard thing to do given how the dollars are structured currently.